I'm Tammy Kolda, an applied mathematician, and this is Unlocking LaTeX Graphics, where we talk about using the powerful tools TXE and PGFPLOTS for creating compelling graphics in LaTeX. Today I'll explain how to get those fancy colored error bars or confidence intervals that you see in many papers. This requires the PGFPLOTS fill between library. I'll also show how to fill between the zero line and a regular plot. Finally, I'll show how to shade a subset of the region just between two x values between the two curves. I'll give examples with both data files and math expressions. This is just touching the surface of what the fill between library can do, but I think you'll find it useful. I'll try to make this video somewhat self-contained, but you might find it useful to go back and watch some of my other videos on PGFPLOTS linked in the show notes. These videos are based on my book, Unlocking LaTeX Graphics, as well as some bonus materials. Today, we'll fill between different plots using tools in PGFPLOTS. Here's the document Preamble. The geometry, parskip, and hyperref packages are included for formatting and links. I set the author name to link back to this YouTube channel. The import package here is PGFPLOTS, and then the star of today's episode is the PGFPLOTS fill between library. I've also made some settings for PGFPLOTS. I set the compatibility to version 1.18, turned on scale only axis, and set the size of every plot to be 3 inches by 2 inches. I explained some of these settings in earlier episodes that I'll link in the show notes. Let's plot a confidence interval. We'll use a data file with columns for x, y, y lower, and y upper, as you can see on the screen. The lower and upper columns will define the uncertainty region. Here I'm defining a relatively simple plot. The first add plot command plots the y lower column. By default, the first column is the x value, so I don't have to specify that explicitly. I'm just drawing it in gray. One thing that's different here is that we're using the name path equals lower right here. We're going to need this later when we do the fill between. I do an analogous thing with the upper plot, and finally I plot the main values. So if I compile this, we see the result, and we get a curve with our upper confidence interval, our lower, and then the main plot in between. We can fill between the upper and lower plots using a new type of plot called fill between. So let me paste that code here. So here I have add plot, and I'm coloring it blue at 20%. And then the plot here is a fill between, and it has the argument of equals, and then you give the two named plots. So up here, we named our paths lower, name path upper, and then we're filling between those two. And when I compile that, you see that we have filled between those two plots. I find it funny how it ends on the left and the right. So let's set enlarge x limits to be false. By default, PGFPLOTS enlarges the x limits by something like 10%. So I'll set that to be false, and that to me just looks a little better. Also, we don't have to draw the upper and lower lines at all. Maybe you kind of want those to be hidden. So rather than drawing it in gray, I'll draw it in none. And now we just have the confidence region and no lines at all. Now let's add a legend. So I'll go ahead and add that here. I have another episode on legends that I'll link in the show notes. So we're making the legend position to be southwest. The legend entries are value and confidence interval. When I compile that, we see that it's not right. It actually picks up those upper and lower. So we don't want that. We need to add forget plot to the first two plots so that they are ignored by the legend. So I'll do that here and here. And now when I compile, the legend is correct. Next, let's see how to fill the area between a curve and the x-axis. In other words, y equals 0. Here I'll plot a simple data file called data.txt. We've seen this file in other episodes. The first column is the x values and the second column is the y values. And I'm naming this path to be A. You can see the result of compiling this over to the right. Now we need to have a zero curve somehow. There are actually a lot of different ways to create one. So I'll just show you a couple of ways, but these are not unique. So the first way that I'll show you works well if you're already working with a data file. So here I'm saying almost the exact same thing as I have above, a little bit different styling. I'm still using the table data.text, and I'll get my X values from there as I did here. The first column is by default the X values, but now I'm using something special, which is Y expression, Y-E-X-P-R. And I'm just setting that equal to 0. So that says for every X value, the Y value is 0. I'm also naming this path 0. When I compile that, we get this path here, this dashed path that is the 0 line. Now I have two paths defined, and so I can do the fill between. And so that looks like what we did before. I have add plot, I'm coloring it magenta at 10%, and I'm filling between A and 0. You probably don't want to draw that 0 line. I was just drawing that for demonstration, but we'll change this to be none and then recompile that. You can also see right now that I have this thing kind of floating above because the lower bar is 0. Maybe I want to set Y-min to be 0 so that it ends at the axis. But now we have a problem that this pink region is drawing over top of the axis and the tick marks. So we have another option, which is axis on top, that will redraw the axis after everything's done. Now you see how to do a line between some curve and the 0 line. Last but not least, I'll show how to use fill between with math expressions. I'll further show how to restrict the range of the fill between, which is helpful for highlighting a region of interest, such as an area that you might be integrating. Let's start off with plotting the curve y equals x squared. I've done plotting math expressions in another video, which I'll link in the show notes. So here we're plotting the math expression x squared. And then I've already filled in the legend entries and the legend position. And so we only have one plot so far, so we'll only see the y equals x squared in our legend. It's drawing this expression x squared in the specified domain that goes from -1 to positive 2.5. Next, let me show you another way to add a 0 line. So let me paste some stuff here. So the first thing is an add plot, which I'm going to do a 0 path. I'm going to go ahead and forget the plot because I don't want it to show up in the legend. I'm going to draw it in red, ultra thick, and dashed. And then I'm plotting the expression with the same domain as above. And then the expression is simply 0. So you can always use this. The main thing is you need to specify an appropriate domain that goes with whatever else you're plotting. When I compile that, you can see that we get our curve down below in red. So that's our 0 curve. And I've also already set y-min equals 0 up here. And then everything underneath of that is filled with yellow. Now, let me show you how to restrict the fill between using something called soft clip. That goes as an option for fill between, not for expression and not for add plot. So we put it here with fill between. So I'm saying soft clip equals curly braces domain 1:2. And when I recompile that, now we are just having the fill between for the x values between 1 and 2. I can also go back and turn off that 0 line by just setting draw equals none, like we did with the other ones. Now you see how to use math expressions to create 0 lines and create plots and use fill between to fill between those. I hope you enjoyed today's episode on error bars and the fill between library in PGFPLOTS. I include a link to the overleaf document I created today in the show notes. If you found this helpful or interesting, please click like or subscribe. If you have TXIE or PGFPLOTS questions, please post them in the comments. If you want to learn more, please check out the other videos. I also have a book, Unlocking LaTeX Graphics, available for purchase at major book retailers. Thanks for watching.